He spent years caring for the little creek that ran behind his home. It was his peace, his morning ritual, and the quiet reminder that nature still breathed even in a world filled with fences and rules. But the Homeowners Association didn't see it that way. To them, the creek didn't fit their vision of perfection. And what happened next destroyed everything they'd built, proving that nature doesn't forgive arrogance. Water was everywhere, crawling through living rooms, swallowing gardens, and turning driveways into shallow ponds. People shouted in panic, wading knee-deep through brown, murky water, clutching boxes, pets, whatever they could save. The air reeked of wet earth and oil, and somewhere in the middle of it all, Devin Rucker stood barefoot in what used to be his backyard, staring at the concrete wall that had caused it all. The same wall the HOA swore would beautify the neighborhood had turned into a dam. A man-made mistake that drowned 27 homes. Reporters arrived before the county trucks did. Their cameras panned across ruined furniture, flooded lawns, and people crying on porches. A drenched woman shouted at one of them, her voice trembling with anger. We told them this would happen." And just like that, the story stopped being about property damage. It became about arrogance, negligence, and how a handful of people's vanity could drown an entire community. Devin didn't say much that day. He just stood there, soaked jeans clinging to his legs, fists trembling at his sides as he watched the current drag his lawn chairs away. He had warned them. He had sent the emails. He had printed the maps. And still, they had laughed. The same people who once told him that the creek behind his house was nothing more than a ditch. But before the storm, before the shouting, before the cameras and lawsuits, there had been peace. The kind of peace you never notice until it's gone. The creek had been small, but it was alive. You could hear it trickling on quiet mornings, smell the grass after rain, see reflections of children tossing pebbles into the water while their parents talked over fences. Devin kept it clear all year, not because anyone asked him to, but because he cared. He said it kept the place breathing. Neighbors used to thank him. Norma Blanchard, who lived 3 doors down, often brought him iced tea in the summer while he trimmed weeds by the bank. And old Eddie Granger, the retired mechanic, helped him build a little wooden footbridge for the children. The creek connected them in simple human ways. Nobody ever thought it was a problem until she moved in. Margot Leary. Margot had a way of turning everything into a business meeting. She was polished, confident, and obsessed with control. Within months of becoming HOA president, she started sending out letters about community improvements. Lawns too brown, fences too tall, paint too faded. And when her eyes landed on that creek behind Devin's home, she called it an eyesore. Devin laughed when he heard that. An eyesore? It's a creek, not a dump, he told Norma. But Margot wasn't joking. She sent out surveys, held a vote, and convinced half the board that the creek was attracting mosquitoes and rodents. Devin tried to explain that it was a natural drainage path, that when it rained, that little stream gave the water somewhere to go. But Margot's mind was made up. She wanted it gone. One morning, Devin woke up to the sound of heavy machinery outside his window. Trucks, workers in neon vests, piles of rebar stacked near his fence. He ran out in disbelief. "You can't just fill that in," he shouted. "That's a waterway." The foreman, a short man holding a clipboard, barely looked up. "We got approval from the board, sir. You'll have to take it up with them." And he did. Devin called, emailed, even printed county flood maps showing the danger. Margot's response came in the form of a short, smug message. "We appreciate your concern, Mr. Rucker. The HOA has determined the area to be non-essential drainage. The improvement will enhance community value." Now, standing in the flood, those words burned in his mind. Non-essential drainage. He watched his neighbors scoop water from their garages with buckets, children crying as toys floated away. Streetlights shimmered on the surface of what used to be a playground. And the thing that broke him most, he had seen it coming. Every drop of it. Rescue crews waded through the streets late into the night. The current was strong in some spots, forcing residents upstairs. By dawn, news vans lined the street. Someone handed Devin a blanket and asked if he wanted to speak on camera. He didn't answer. He just stared toward the buried creek, where the ground beneath the concrete was already starting to buckle, trying to breathe. They thought they could bury nature, he whispered quietly, almost to himself. Then he turned and walked back toward his porch, his shoes making that heavy suction sound in the mud. But this wasn't the beginning of his story. This was the consequence. To understand how a quiet man became the face of a neighborhood's downfall, you have to go back to when the fight first began. Before everything turned to chaos, Devin Rucker lived the kind of life most people imagine when they talk about peace and quiet. His home sat at the edge of a cul-de-sac in Wilmington, North Carolina, surrounded by oaks and dogwoods that whispered with every breeze. He worked from home as a technician for a solar company, spending most of his afternoons tending to the creek behind his property. To Devin, that creek wasn't just a patch of water. It was a living thing, a reminder that something wild still existed in a place where every mailbox looked the same. Most mornings, he'd step outside with a mug of coffee, barefoot, watching the mist lift from the surface. Frogs croaked, dragonflies danced, and sometimes a raccoon's fresh footprints marked the muddy edge. Devin said it made him feel connected, like the world still had rhythm. Neighbors teased him for it. "Man, you treat that ditch better than I treat my car." Eddie would laugh from his fence. Devin grinned back. "You keep your car running, I keep the water moving." Same principle. He'd spend hours after a storm pulling debris, trimming reeds when they grew too high, making sure the little bridge was sturdy. The kids adored that bridge. 2 cedar planks with handrails he'd varnished himself. Every Halloween, he strung orange lights across it and placed a bucket of candy in the middle. Parents trusted him. Devin was the kind of man who noticed if your mailbox leaned too far or if your trash bin got blown down by the wind. But he never made a show of it. He didn't do things for praise. He simply believed that people should care for what's theirs and for what connects them. That creek connected them until Margot Leary came along. When she moved into the neighborhood, everything started to change. She made an entrance no one could ignore. A new expensive car, a 2-story remodel that gleamed under the sun, and a smile that seemed permanent but never once reached her eyes. Within weeks of moving in, flyers appeared in every mailbox across oaks and meadows. Her campaign slogan read in elegant blue cursive, "Bringing order to oaks and meadows." Devin didn't even know the neighborhood had a problem until Margot Leary told everyone it did. She won the election by a landslide, mostly because no one else wanted the responsibility. And the moment she became president, the letters began to arrive. Margot had rules for everything: how tall your grass could be, where you could leave your trash cans, even what color you could paint your front door. At first, people laughed about it, but her tone made the laughter fade. There was something cold in her precision, something that made people obey, without quite knowing why. Devin tried to stay out of it. He wasn't one for confrontation. He'd just wave politely when she passed by, even when she gave him that faint, judging smile that seemed to notice every smudge of dirt on his boots. But it didn't take long before she noticed his creak. The first complaint came in a thick envelope, stamped with the HOA seal. The bold text made it sound official, almost threatening. It claimed the creek was a breeding ground for disease-carrying insects and that it detracted from the neighborhood's visual harmony. Devin read it twice, then marched straight to Margot's door. She opened it wearing gardening gloves. Her yard trimmed into near perfection, hedges shaped like sculptures, tulips planted with ruler-like precision. Devin kept his tone steady. "Margot, I got your letter. The creek isn't a hazard. It's part of the county's drainage system. If you start filling it in, you'll flood half this street," Margot smiled, polite but sharp. "Devin, I understand your attachment, but the HOA has received multiple complaints. We're simply maintaining standards." "Standards?" he repeated, disbelief in his voice. "It's a stream, Margot. Nature doesn't follow HOA rules." Her expression never changed. "Then maybe it's time it did." She closed the door before he could reply. From that day on, Devin noticed her everywhere, walking the neighborhood with a clipboard, jotting down notes, whispering with neighbors. Some people started avoiding him, suddenly too busy to talk or pretending to be on their phones when he waved. Others, like Norma, stayed loyal. "She's got too much time and not enough kindness," Norma said one afternoon, shaking her head. "You keep doing what's right, Devin. People will see it." He hoped she was right, so he began documenting everything: photos, dates, rainfall records, anything that could prove the creek's importance. He even called the county's environmental office, and they confirmed what he already knew. The creek was part of an active drainage route. "They'll need a permit to alter it," the clerk told him. "Make sure they know that." Devin forwarded that email straight to the HOA board. No one replied, not even a thank you. A week later, a new sign appeared at the entrance of the neighborhood. "Community Beautification Project coming soon." That's when he felt it, the shift. A quiet, uncomfortable tension that spread through oaks and meadows, like humidity before a storm. People stopped talking about it openly. They avoided eye contact when he brought it up. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something else. People choosing comfort over confrontation. "They're gonna do something stupid," Devin told Norma over coffee one morning. "And when it backfires, everyone will act surprised." Norma looked at the creek, sunlight shimmering across the water. "That's how it always goes," she said softly. "Nobody listens until they're ankle-deep in their own mistake." She was right. Devin just didn't know how right yet, because by the time those trucks rolled in, everything he'd warned them about was already set in motion. The first meeting about the so-called Creek Project was held in Margot Leary's living room one quiet Wednesday evening. Her house smelled faintly of lemon polish and control. She had set out bottled water, gluten-free cookies, and perfectly aligned stacks of typed agendas. Devin sat across from her at the far end of the long dining table, his own folder thick with photos and maps. The blinds were half closed, and the low hum of an air purifier filled the silence as residents trickled in, some curious, others nervous. Margot stood at the head of the table with her signature posture, shoulders back, chin high, her voice calm but commanding. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "As you know, we've received multiple complaints about the creek running behind the Rucker property. We believe it's contributing to our mosquito issue and bringing down property values." Devin leaned forward. "Hold on, Margot. You make it sound like I own the creek. It's county land, part of the natural drainage system for this whole area. If you block it, you're asking for floods." A few residents exchanged uncertain glances. Some fidgeted with their papers, but Margot didn't flinch. "Devin," she said smoothly, "we've reviewed your concerns, but let's be honest, the waterway is an eyesore. It overflows every year, and you've been maintaining it on your own, without authorization. If anything, you've been interfering." That word, interfering, hit him like a slap. Interfering. Devin's voice tightened. "I'm keeping it from clogging. If I hadn't cleared it last spring, half of Oak Street would have been underwater." Margot folded her hands and offered that small, condescending smile. "Exaggeration doesn't help your case, Mr. Rucker. We've already spoken with a landscaping contractor. They're confident the area can be improved. Concrete channels, smooth surfaces, no standing water." Eddie Granger raised his hand slowly from the far end of the table. "So, you're going to pave over the creek?" "It's not paving, Mr. Granger," Margot replied, flashing her rehearsed smile. "It's controlled landscaping." Devin couldn't hold back. "Controlled landscaping? You're talking about pouring cement into a living stream. You can't just kill a waterway because it doesn't match your flower beds." The room shifted, uneasy murmurs, eyes darting polite discomfort. Margot's expression hardened. Her voice dipped into a chill that froze the air. "Let's keep emotions in check," she said calmly. "We'll take a vote as required by HOA bylaws. Majority rules." Devin looked around the table at faces he once called neighbors, people he'd helped fix gutters for, shared cookouts with, waved to every morning. Now not one of them would meet his eyes. When the vote came, 7 hands rose in favor. Only 2 against. Margot gave a tight, satisfied nod. "Motion passes. We'll begin the project within the next month." Devin gathered his papers slowly, the sound of rustling pages, the only thing breaking the silence. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "And when it rains, you'll all remember this moment." Margot's reply came soft but cutting. "Let's hope you're wrong, Devin." That night he couldn't sleep. Rain tapped gently on the window, steady but light. He stepped outside with a flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness. The creek shimmered under the pale glow, carrying bits of leaves and twigs downstream. It looked harmless, peaceful. Hard to believe something so quiet could one day turn dangerous if suffocated. By the weekend, the rumors had spread. People said the project would make the neighborhood look more professional. Others claimed it would raise property values. Devin became that guy, the one who overreacted, who made things difficult. Even Norma, his closest friend, tried to prepare him. "They think you're being dramatic, Dev," she said. "You know how people get when someone questions authority." "I'm not questioning," he muttered, rubbing his temples. "I'm warning them." A week later, a letter arrived. Thick paper, HOA letterhead, every word sharp and cold. "Dear Mr. Rucker, due to continued interference and unauthorized maintenance activities, we request that you cease all work around the creek area immediately. Further violations may result in penalties or fines as outlined in HOA policy." Devin laughed bitterly. "So now taking care of my own yard is a violation?" He said to himself. He set the letter on the counter, grabbed his camera, and walked straight outside. He took pictures of the creek, every angle, every slope, every drain feeding into it. He sent them all to the county's environmental division with a short note. "They're planning to fill this in. No permit, please advise." 2 days later, the county replied, "We're reviewing the case. Construction should not proceed without proper authorization." He printed that email and slipped it into Margot's mailbox the next morning. By afternoon, it was gone. Not acknowledged. Not mentioned. Just gone. His frustration grew heavier with every day that passed. You could feel the tension in the air. Neighbors whispering, conversations stopping when he walked by. HOA meetings continued without him now. Someone finally told him, "They're calling you the problem guy." "Margot says you're trying to make her look bad," Devin sighed. "She's doing a fine job of that herself." Still, he didn't stop. He called county offices, asked about drainage laws, flood risks, permits, anything that might help. One hydrologist told him plainly, if they pour concrete without redirecting the flow, the water's going to find its way back, maybe into people's homes. That line stayed with him. Water always finds its way back. He printed it out, highlighted it in yellow, and pinned it to his fridge, a silent reminder of what was coming. Meanwhile, Margot was preparing for her big victory. Flyers went out showing a perfect, computer-rendered version of the future. Clean walkways, neat hedges, polished stones where the creek used to flow. People smiled again, ready for change, not realizing what kind of change was coming. Devin could feel it building, like pressure behind a dam. Silent, unstoppable. Then, one Saturday morning, far too early for anything good, it began. The low growl of diesel engines broke the calm. Devin was sipping his first cup of coffee when the sound reached him. He stepped outside in his slippers and saw the convoy, flatbeds carrying rebar, cement mixers, stacks of wooden forms. Workers in neon vests unloaded, stretching, laughing, unaware of what they were about to do. Devin's stomach dropped. "You've got to be kidding me," he whispered, setting his mug on the porch railing. The HOA had ignored every warning, every document, every email. They were really doing it. He grabbed his phone and started recording as he walked toward the noise. "Hey!" he called to one of the workers. "What's this for?" The man checked his clipboard. "Creek channel fill," he said casually. "We're sealing off the drainage line. Orders from the HOA board." Devin blinked. "You mean you're filling it completely?" The worker shrugged. "Just following instructions, sir." Neighbors began stepping out now, curious, sleepy, still in robes and slippers. Margot appeared from her driveway, dressed like she'd been waiting for this moment. Khakis pressed, hair pinned back, clipboard tucked neatly under her arm. "Morning, everyone," she called cheerfully. "Big day for Oaks and Meadows." This is the start of our beautification project. Devin walked toward her, trying to keep his voice steady. Margot, you don't have a permit. I've confirmed it with the county. You can't alter a drainage path without clearance. She smiled like someone humoring a child. We're not altering it, Devin, we're improving it. The contractor assured me the concrete will help manage runoff. Manage, he snapped. You're blocking it. Water doesn't just vanish when you pour cement over it, Margot. It finds another path. It'll back up into people's yards. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Margot's smile wavered but held. We've already taken a vote. You lost. Let's not make a scene. Devin stared at her for a long moment. You think a vote changes physics? Her jaw tightened. Mr. Rucker, please step aside and let the professionals do their work. He didn't move. The foreman walked up, clearly uneasy. Sir, we're on a tight schedule. I can't delay my crew. Devin lifted his phone, recording himself now. His voice was calm but heavy. This is unauthorized construction on a public drainage route. I've warned you in writing and in person. You go through with this, and I'll report it. The foreman hesitated, looking toward Margot. She waved a dismissive hand. Do your job. And they did. By noon, the first layers of concrete were poured. The sound of the mixer echoed through the neighborhood. A steady grind, a wet slap of cement covering earth. Devin stood there watching as gray slurry swallowed the creek he had cared for all these years. The smell was sharp, almost metallic. The ground trembled under the weight of machinery. Norma walked up beside him, her voice low and sad. They really did it. Yeah, Devin said softly. They just buried a living thing. For hours. He filmed everything. Workers tamping soil, smoothing the wet concrete, laughing about weekend plans, completely unaware that they were sealing their own fate beneath that gray surface. He wanted every second on record, every sound of arrogance hardening into silence. By the time the last truck left, the creek was gone. What remained was a long, narrow scar of gray concrete glistening under the afternoon sun. It looked clean, lifeless, and wrong. Even the birds seemed confused, circling above before drifting toward the woods, leaving behind an eerie quiet. That evening, Devin sat on his porch with Norma and Eddie. The three of them watched the concrete channel shimmer like something unnatural. Eddie broke the silence first. Looks clean, I'll give her that, he said, squinting at the dull gray. But man, that don't look right. Devin nodded slowly. It's not. You block water, it finds another path. Always does. That night, he sent all his footage to the county. Videos, photos, emails, everything he had. His message was clear and desperate. This will cause flooding. Please intervene before it's too late. 2 days later, a reply came. It wasn't from a person, just an automated message that said, your complaint has been received and will be reviewed. Weeks passed. Nothing happened. Margot strutted around the neighborhood like a conquering hero. She even held a ribbon-cutting ceremony for what she proudly called the Oakshire Creek Renewal. There were balloons, snacks, and a big blue banner. Families posed for pictures beside the concrete trench, smiling like it was something beautiful. From his porch, Devin watched with folded arms. Norma sighed beside him. They're celebrating a time bomb. Yeah, Devin said softly, eyes still fixed on the crowd. They just don't hear it ticking yet. In the days that followed, little things began to change. After each rain, puddles lingered longer. The grass near the lower yards stayed soggy, then turned yellow. A faint smell of mildew crept through the air. Nature was sending warnings, but no one wanted to read them. Let it go, Dev, Norma said one afternoon as they sipped iced tea on her porch. They won't listen until they see it with their own eyes. He stared out at the horizon. The air was heavy, sticky, restless. By then it'll be too late, he murmured. You can't stop water. You can only guide it. Summer rolled on, thick with heat. Kids played basketball in the cul-de-sac, their laughter echoing through the still air. One afternoon, their ball bounced into the concrete channel. A boy climbed down to fetch it. It's dry, he yelled. Feels weird, like a parking lot. Devin's stomach tightened. Tell your folks to keep you out of there, he called. The boy nodded and ran back to his friends, but Devin couldn't shake the unease. That dry floor wouldn't stay that way forever. He spent that evening sorting through every file, every photo, every timestamp, labeling them neatly in a folder on his computer. HOA creek violation. He wasn't planning to sue anyone. He just wanted the truth on record, so when things went wrong, no one could say they weren't warned. Still, no word from the county. When he finally reached someone, a clerk named Peter Lang, the man sounded weary. "Yes, Mr. Rucker, we've seen your file," Peter said. "But there's a backlog of environmental cases. Unless there's immediate danger, it'll take some time, so they can block a drainage system. And we just wait." Devin asked, his voice tight with disbelief. "I understand your frustration," Peter said. "But there are procedures." Devin hung up and stared at his phone. "Procedures," he muttered. That's what people said when they didn't want responsibility. Later that evening, Margot showed up at the edge of his yard. Her voice was calm but sharp enough to cut. "Devin, I'd appreciate it if you stopped spreading false information about the creek project." He crossed his arms. "You mean facts? Because last I checked, flooding doesn't care about HOA rules." Her smile thinned. "You're stirring fear. People are anxious enough. They should be," he said quietly. "You buried a living waterway." Margot's expression hardened. "We improved our neighborhood, Mr. Rucker. Some people just can't stand change." She turned and walked away before he could reply. That night, Devin sat at his kitchen table, opened his laptop, and hit record. His face was tired, but his eyes were steady. "It's July 29th, he said into the camera. "The creek's been filled for 3 weeks. Rain's been light, but the ground's not drying. If the storm that's coming hits us full on, Oakshire's going under. I'm saving this clip because when it happens, they'll say no one warned them." He closed the laptop and looked out the window. The sky had turned a strange gold, the kind of light that comes before summer storms, beautiful but tense. Somewhere in the distance, thunder grumbled. The next few days passed quietly, but the air felt heavy, almost electric. Neighbors went about their lives as if nothing was coming, washing cars, mowing lawns, planning barbecues. Margot even hosted a garden tour for the HOA, proudly walking guests past the sealed creek. "Looks professional, doesn't it?" she said, smiling for photos. Devin stayed home. He sat on his porch, watching the sky darken. When the first raindrops fell, they seemed harmless, almost soft. But by midnight, the rain had turned steady. By morning, it was relentless. He woke to the sound of thunder rolling like distant artillery. The gutters were already overflowing, spilling water onto the lawns. He stepped outside in his raincoat and boots, the air thick with the smell of wet earth. Puddles had formed where grass used to drain. He stared out at the rising water and whispered, "Here it comes." By the second morning, the sky had turned the color of wet ash. The storm didn't stop, it only changed moods. Sometimes it screamed with wind and lightning. Other times it paused, pretending to calm, only to return twice as fierce. Water streamed down every driveway, forming shallow rivers that merged in the streets. Inside his house, Devin pressed his camera to the window, recording. "This is exactly what I said would happen," he muttered. "The drainage is blocked, and the water has nowhere to go." Down the street he saw Norma fighting her umbrella against the wind. "Devin!" she shouted. "The Granger's garage is flooding." He sloshed through knee-deep water to reach her. The sight stopped him cold. Eddie Granger's driveway had turned into a riverbed. Water rushed toward the street, but hit the concrete channel and began to climb, rising higher, finding no exit. Across the neighborhood, panic spread like wildfire. People waded through brown water, clutching boxes, pets, and whatever they could save. Cars stalled. Trash bins floated. Gardens vanished beneath murky waves. And at the center of it all stood that lifeless gray channel, mocking them with its stillness as the storm raged on. Devin ran to help Norma move her things to higher ground. "I told them!" he shouted over the thunder. "I told them this would happen." She gripped his arm, soaked to the bone. "Save your breath, Dev. Help Eddie." By dusk, the whole neighborhood looked unrecognizable. Yards turned into ponds, porches into islands. Margot stood at her doorway, hair drenched. Her perfect yard drowned beneath the same water she'd tried to control. Her voice broke as she yelled orders no one could hear. The clipboard that once symbolized her authority floated past her feet and drifted down the street. Devin watched from a distance, chest heaving, rain streaming down his face. There was no satisfaction in being right, just sorrow. For the land, for the people, for the ignorance that had brought them here. Nature doesn't forgive arrogance. It only waits for its moment. And that night, when Oakshire Meadows drowned in the water it had tried to silence, every resident learned what Devin Rucker had always known. Water always finds its way back. Margot's grand beautification project was now nothing more than a muddy dream, buried under a raging brown river that swallowed everything in its path. Water roared through the streets, slamming against doors and walls like an angry beast. Eddie stood at the doorway of his garage, shouting over the storm. "It's coming through the vents! My tools, my boxes, they're floating! Turn off your breaker!" Devin yelled back, his voice barely cutting through the wind. "Now, Eddie, go! Kill the power before it's too late!" Eddie vanished inside as thunder cracked overhead. Norma was just a few yards away, struggling to stay upright, the water tugging hard at her legs like invisible hands trying to drag her down. Devin splashed toward her and grabbed her arm. "Come on, higher ground!" he shouted. All around them, the neighborhood had turned into chaos. People screamed from their porches. Doors slammed against their frames. Dogs barked wildly from somewhere in the storm. Car alarms blared, then drowned beneath the rising flood. Then, in a blinding flash of lightning, Devin saw it. The concrete channel. The one they'd built to tame the creek. It was cracking. The water inside pushed and twisted like a trapped creature fighting for its life. Chunks of earth broke loose along the edges. The creek wasn't dead. It was fighting back. And then came her voice, Margot. She stood near her porch, drenched to the bone, her designer raincoat plastered to her body. Her hair clung to her face as she shouted over the roar. "Why is it rising so fast?" she screamed, panic in her voice. Devin stormed toward her through the current, his clothes soaked, his heart pounding. "Because you buried the outlet," he shouted back. "The storm drains are blocked. There's nowhere for the runoff to go." "No!" she yelled, shaking her head, desperate. "No," the contractor said. "The contractor's gone, Margot." He cut in sharply. "And the water doesn't care about your vote." Behind her, her backyard was vanishing under the flood. Decorative lights flickered under the surface, glowing faintly before shorting out with a hiss. Unsparked, then exploded. Margot stumbled back, terrified. Devin didn't have time to argue. Down the street, an elderly couple was screaming for help. Their basement had begun to flood. Without hesitation, he ran toward them, wading waist-deep through the swirling current, his phone still recording. Inside their home, the floorboards had started to buckle. Water poured through the walls, dripping from the ceiling like veins bursting open. "Grab what you can and head upstairs," he told them. "Don't touch the outlets. Don't touch anything electrical." Outside, a car alarm wailed until the current silenced it with a gurgling hiss. The rain didn't stop. It only grew angrier. Even the wind seemed alive, howling in frustration, tearing branches from trees and hurling them down the street. By mid-afternoon, the lower half of Oakshire Meadows was gone. Underwater, streetlights flickered, then went dark. The only light came from the lightning, brief, violent flashes slicing across the sky, illuminating the destruction in white bursts. Devin stood at his doorway, chest heaving, staring at what used to be his backyard. The small bridge he'd built for his kids had drifted away, the planks spinning like lost memories on the brown waves. Norma waded over to him, clutching a trash bag full of dry clothes. Her face was pale, her voice breathless. "It's bad near the park," she said. "The playground's gone." Devin didn't answer. He couldn't. Words were useless now. Then came the sound, the one that made his blood run cold, a deep, cracking noise, followed by a rumble from beneath the earth. The concrete channel was splitting apart. Devin turned in time to see it crumble, giant slabs of cement breaking loose and vanishing beneath the torrent. Water gushed through the cracks, tearing everything apart, carving its way back to the shape it remembered. The creek was reclaiming its freedom. "Devin!" Someone shouted behind him. Eddie, drenched and shivering, stumbled toward him. "It's coming up through my floorboards now. My house, it's done!" Devin looked around at the chaos. Floating debris, screaming neighbors, half-submerged cars. His throat tightened with fury and grief. He had warned them. Over and over, he turned his camera toward the broken channel, his voice trembling but firm. "This," he said, "is what happens when people think they can control nature. You can't bury a creek. You can only bury your common sense." By nightfall, emergency boats began arriving. Red and blue lights cut through the rain, painting the flooded streets in eerie colors. Families were rescued one by one, carrying what little they could. Children wrapped in blankets, soaked photo albums, terrified pets. Devin helped as much as he could, guiding people through the water toward the rescuers. When it was finally his turn to leave, he looked back one last time. Margot was still there, standing on her porch steps, trembling, her mascara running, her voice gone. She stared at her perfect garden, the one she had fought to protect, now sinking beneath the flood. For the first time she looked small. "Come on, man," a rescuer said, tugging Devin's shoulder. "We gotta move." Devin climbed into the boat, his eyes locked on the water rushing over his home. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "Told you it would find its way back." But even as the rain began to ease, the real storm was just beginning. The storm of blame, of lawsuits, of anger that would tear this community apart. When the skies finally cleared, silence fell over Oakshire Meadows. Not peace, just silence. The kind that comes after something breaks. The floodwater lingered for days, refusing to leave. Brown and heavy, it swallowed lawns, driveways, and pride. The neighborhood looked like the aftermath of a hurricane. Piles of ruined furniture lining the streets, carpets hanging from fences, the sharp smell of mildew clinging to the air. 3 days later, the rescue crews were gone. County officials posted flood warnings. Insurance adjusters circled like vultures, snapping photos, taking notes, speaking in clipped tones about damage estimates. That's when the real chaos began. Devin stood at the edge of his destroyed backyard, his boots sinking into the mud. Broken slabs of concrete jutted from the silt like tombstones. The creek had reclaimed its path, but at a brutal cost. Across the street, Margot was back at it, clipboard in hand, directing a group of residents. Her voice sharp, businesslike, as if she could organize her way out of the guilt. "Everyone needs to document their damages for the insurance claim," she said briskly. "The board will review all losses." Devin stared at her in disbelief. "The board?" he repeated, walking closer. "You mean the same board that caused this?" She looked up, her eyes red, her tone defensive. "This isn't the time for accusations. We're all victims here." "Victims?" Devin's voice rose. "You poured concrete into a live creek. I told you what would happen. You ignored every warning, and now you call this an accident?" A small crowd gathered, the same neighbors who once sided with Margot. Some angry, some ashamed. Eddie crossed his arms. "He's right, Margot. We voted because you said it was safe." Her voice cracked. "The contractor assured us the design would handle runoff." Devin pulled a soggy folder from under his arm. "I have every email, every message. You didn't get a county permit. You didn't call environmental services. You just buried the creek because it didn't fit your idea of perfect." Margot's lip trembled. "We were trying to make things better. Better." Devin pointed around. "Kids can't play outside. Basements are ruined. Power was out for 2 days. Does this look better to you?" The silence that followed was heavier than the floodwater had been. A few people nodded. Norma stepped forward, her tone calm but cutting. "You wanted order, Margot. Now look at us. We're drowning in the mess you made." Margot's eyes filled with tears, but she turned away. "This isn't all on me," she muttered. "The board approved it. On your recommendation," Eddie said quietly. Devin sighed. He wasn't seeking revenge, just truth. "You can't just blame a contractor and walk away," he said. "I've already contacted the county. They're sending an environmental inspector this week. You might want to have your paperwork ready." Margot froze. "You reported us?" "I did," Devin said simply. "Someone has to." That night, a few neighbors gathered in Devin's kitchen. The same ones who once ignored him now wanted to talk. "You tried to warn us," one man said. "We just didn't believe it could get this bad." Devin poured them coffee, his voice quiet. "I didn't want to be right," he said. But water doesn't play politics. It just follows the laws of gravity. That night, long before anyone expected, a county inspector showed up. Her name was Ellen Pritchard, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a voice that carried authority. She wore waterproof boots, a dark raincoat, and carried a clipboard that looked like it had seen 100 disasters. "I've seen a lot of flood damage," she said, surveying the shattered concrete, "but this is something else." Devin led her through what was left of the creek. The air still smelled like wet soil and loss. He explained everything, the emails, the warnings, the day it all collapsed. Ellen listened carefully, saying nothing until she knelt by the edge of the broken concrete. She ran her gloved hand along the jagged line and frowned. "You can't block a natural channel without hydrological studies or permits," she said. "Whoever authorized this is in serious violation of state law." Margot, who had been standing a few yards away, finally stepped forward, her voice shaky. We didn't know." Ellen stood up sharply. "You should have. These rules exist for a reason. This isn't just property damage. You've redirected an entire watershed." Margot's mouth fell open, but no words came. Devin didn't say anything either. For once, he didn't need to. The evidence was right there in front of everyone. Broken cement, stagnant pools of brown water, debris tangled in fences. As Ellen snapped photos and took notes, Margot backed away, pale and trembling. By morning, the neighborhood's pride, their so-called beautification project, was no longer a symbol of order. It was a crime scene under investigation. The next day, the story spread faster than the flood itself. News vans lined the entrance of Oakshere Meadows. Reporters interviewed residents while drones buzzed overhead, capturing every ruined yard and waterlogged street. Neighbors who once smiled for HOA meetings now stood in front of cameras describing panic and destruction. Devin kept quiet, answering questions when asked, never once gloating. He didn't want fame or vindication. He wanted peace. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the soaked rooftops, Devin sat on his porch next to Norma. She handed him a cup of coffee that steamed in the cool air. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" she said softly. "Being right, but still losing everything." He nodded slowly, staring into the muddy street. "I didn't want to win," he said. "I just wanted them to listen." But the flood, he knew, was only the beginning. The real storm was about to start. The kind fought in courtrooms and headlines, where words cut deeper than water. Within a week, the HOA's beautification project had turned into a county-wide scandal. Local stations ran the footage on repeat. One headline from the Wilmington Ledger spread across the state. "Neighborhood faces lawsuit after HOA fills creek with concrete." That was the day Camille Drury called. Devin was sitting on his porch again, sorting through soggy insurance papers when his phone buzzed. Her voice was calm, confident, the kind of tone that belonged to someone who had stood in the middle of chaos before. "Mr. Rucker," she said, "my name is Camille Drury. I'm an environmental attorney out of Durham. I've seen the coverage about the creek. I'd like to meet and discuss what options you and your neighbors might have." Devin rubbed his forehead. He sounded tired because he was. "Honestly, Miss Drury, I'm not trying to sue anyone. I just want it fixed before it happens again." Camille's reply was measured but firm. "Sometimes the only way to fix something like this is to hold people accountable first." They met the next day at Devin's dining table. Papers and photos covered every inch. Camille was in her late 30s, composed and sharp. She spoke with quiet certainty, the kind that didn't need to shout to be heard. "You kept records?" she asked, flipping through his folder. "Everything," Devin said. "Emails, photos, letters. I didn't plan on being a whistleblower. I just wanted to protect the creek." Camille held up one of the HOA letters, her brow tightening. "This letter is illegal," she said flatly. "They had no authority to order you to stop maintaining a natural drainage route. And they ignored existing county regulations. That's not a misunderstanding, it's a violation." She pointed to a photo of the cracked channel. "What they did is considered an unauthorized alteration of a protected waterway. North Carolina law is very clear about that. The HOA can be fined heavily, And if the damage spread to personal property, residents have grounds for civil claims. Devin leaned back in his chair, trying to absorb it all. So they really broke the law? Camille met his eyes. They didn't just break it. They bulldozed through it. That line stayed with him. For the first time since the flood, Devin felt something other than anger. He felt direction. Later that week, Camille organized a community meeting at the local library. Word spread fast. Nearly every homeowner showed up, some holding photos, others with notebooks full of losses and repair estimates. Margot arrived last, wearing sunglasses indoors, trying to stay unnoticed. Camille stood at the front of the room, steady and composed. "Thank you for coming," she began. "I've reviewed the situation at Oaksier Meadows, and what happened here isn't just a mistake. It's a violation of state and county law." A ripple of murmurs filled the room. One man raised his hand. "Are you saying the HOA is responsible for all this?" "Yes," Camille said. "The board authorized construction without permits and interfered with a natural watercourse. That's negligence, plain and simple." Margot suddenly stood, her voice defensive. "Excuse me, Miss Drury, but the HOA acted with the best information we had. The contractor assured us." Camille turned to face her, calm but unyielding. "Do you have the contractor's environmental compliance certificate?" Margot hesitated. "We didn't receive one." "Then your assurance means nothing," Camille said evenly. "And ignorance doesn't exempt anyone from liability." The room fell silent. Devin watched from the front row. He could see realization spreading through the crowd. Neighbors who once blamed fate, now understanding it wasn't fate at all. It was choice. After the meeting, several residents surrounded Camille. Some were angry, some were tearful. "We lost everything," one woman said, voice trembling. "Insurance won't cover it. They called it man-made negligence." Camille nodded, jotting down notes. "That's consistent," she said. "You'll need collective representation. A civil action against the HOA, possibly the contractor, and anyone who signed off on the project. The goal isn't revenge, it's restoration." When the meeting ended, Devin walked her out to her car. The parking lot still smelled faintly of wet grass and diesel from the flood trucks. "You really think we can win this?" he asked quietly. Camille gave a faint smile. "You don't need to win, Mr. Rucker. You just need to prove the truth." Nature already did half the work. In the days that followed, Camille worked tirelessly. She helped Devin organize witness statements, timeline charts, and photos. He spent late nights at his kitchen table, scanning evidence, labeling files, building a case that was no longer just his. It was everyone's. Emails, drone footage, Ellen Pritchard's inspection report. Everything lined up perfectly. Meanwhile, Margot began to panic. She sent out a letter to every homeowner. "The HOA will handle all legal matters internally. Cooperation is appreciated." That same letter reached Camille's desk within hours. She read it aloud, shaking her head. "She's trying to contain the damage," she said. "That's usually what happens when people realize their authority's slipping away." By the end of the week, Camille filed a formal complaint with the State Environmental Board and a preliminary notice with the county. The story exploded again. News cameras returned. But this time, they weren't chasing chaos. They were chasing accountability. Devin found himself standing in front of microphones, explaining what had happened in calm, measured tones. "We just want accountability," he told one reporter. This wasn't a freak accident. It was a choice that ignored every warning. And behind his quiet words, the story of Oaksier Meadows began to shift, from tragedy to reckoning. It was a choice, and everyone paid for it. Camille stood quietly at the back of the room, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Later, she said softly, "Keep talking, Devin. People need to see what happens when pride replaces common sense." He nodded, weary but resolute. "You think the HOA will finally back down?" She paused before replying. "Not yet. People like Margot don't surrender. They unravel." She was right. As lawsuits began to take shape, the story of Oaksier Meadows spread far beyond their quiet county lines. It started with a 30-second clip. A local news station filmed Devin standing ankle-deep in muddy water beside the cracked concrete. saying, "You can't bury a creek and expect it to forget where it used to run." That line struck something deep in people. Within hours, the clip exploded across social media. Thousands of comments poured in. Some called him a hero. Others couldn't believe a homeowners association could be that careless. By morning, Oakshire Meadows wasn't just a local disaster. It was a national headline. Cable networks ran stories titled "The HOA That Flooded Itself" and "The Concrete Creek Scandal." Devin's inbox filled overnight with messages from reporters, environmental advocates, and even law students wanting to interview him. He hadn't meant to become a symbol of anything. He just wanted his neighborhood to stop sinking under its own arrogance. Inside Oakshire, panic grew like mold in the damp air. Half the residents wanted to stand with Devin and Camille. The rest just wanted the cameras gone, afraid their home values would crumble faster than the concrete they'd poured. Margot Leary's once pristine house turned into a symbol of everything that went wrong, perfect on the outside, surrounded by ruin and resentment. She barely left her home, and when she did, whispers followed her like shadows. News vans parked at the end of her driveway. Drones buzzed overhead. One morning she stepped outside to face the media, trying to defend herself. "This community made decisions collectively," she said, voice shaking. "We didn't act alone." But the clip went viral again, not because of her defense, but because of her tone. It sounded like deflection. Camille, ever steady, handled the growing publicity with grace. She wrote careful statements for the press, making sure residents' voices were heard. "This isn't about punishment," she told one interviewer. "It's about responsibility, about people in power thinking they can rewrite the rules of nature." Devin sat beside her, quiet but firm. "We just want our homes to be safe again," he said. Public pressure pushed the county into action. Inspectors returned with state officials in tow, measuring water depth, taking soil samples, photographing the damage. The environmental report confirmed every warning Devin had given them months before. The HOA had poured concrete into a regulated drainage path, without permits, without consultation, and in violation of state law. When the findings went public, the backlash was immediate. The state ordered the HOA to remove all remaining concrete and restore the creek to its natural form, a project that would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Board members were held personally responsible for the damage. When Camille broke the news to Devin, he didn't celebrate. He just sat down, shoulders heavy, and let out a long breath. "Guess they're finally listening," he murmured. Camille smiled faintly. "Listening's the easy part, fixing it. That's where the real work begins." Soon, cleanup crews arrived. Excavators dug out the concrete, one slab at a time. Cameras rolled as the first trickle of water returned, glinting under the sunlight like forgiveness. Children cheered from the sidewalks, watching the creek come alive again. Devin stood there, mud on his boots, feeling as though something sacred had come back from the dead. But not everyone cheered. The next HOA meeting, held at the community center since Margot's home was off limits to cameras, felt like a courtroom. Residents demanded answers. Margot sat at the head of the table, pale and trembling. "I understand your anger," she began softly, "but this was never meant to harm anyone." "We believed," a man interrupted, slamming his hand against the table. "You believed wrong. You cost us thousands. My insurance won't even cover this. They said it wasn't a natural disaster. It was your decision." Voices rose, overlapping in fury. Norma stood up, her calm breaking into steel. "Margot, you treated nature like it was a nuisance. You buried it under concrete, and now you're buried in the mess you made." For the first time, Margot's mask cracked. She began to cry, whispering that she hadn't known, that she only wanted the neighborhood to look beautiful. But it was too late. The board voted unanimously to remove her as president. Outside, reporters waited for Devin. One asked, "Do you feel vindicated?" He paused, looking toward the wet street shimmering under the late light. "No," he said quietly, "because none of this should have happened. If one person had just stopped to listen, just one, this could have been avoided." That short answer went viral again. It became the closing line in dozens of news stories, played over images of flowing water and cracked pavement. Environmental groups began referencing the Oakshire case in lectures and conferences. Devin's simple warning, "You can't bury a creek and expect it to forget where it used to run," became a quote used to teach humility in planning and leadership. Camille told him one evening, "You know you started something bigger than this neighborhood, right?" Devin smiled faintly. "I didn't start it. Margot's concrete did." For the first time in months, he slept through the night. A week later, the rain returned, soft, steady, harmless. Devin stood on his porch, watching it, the creek whispering behind his house, clear and alive again. But even as peace returned, he knew the real lesson wasn't about floods or lawsuits. It was about pride, how far people will go to control what was never theirs. By the time the last of the debris was gone, Oakshire Meadows looked different. The lawns were scarred, sidewalks torn, but there was something new in the air, a fragile honesty. People weren't pretending anymore. They waved again. They helped each other rebuild. The flood had washed away more than soil. It had stripped away the pride that once held the neighborhood hostage. Devin became the quiet center of that recovery. Neighbors came to him for advice, asking how to reseed waterlogged lawns or fix drainage properly. He'd walk the creek every morning, shovel in hand, clearing branches, checking the flow. The water moved freely now, whispering against the stones like a friend finally heard. One afternoon, as he worked, a familiar voice spoke behind him. "Need an extra pair of hands?" He turned. It was Margot. She looked smaller now, humbled. The perfect hair, the pressed khakis, all gone. She wore jeans and muddy boots. Devin raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to get dirty?" She smiled weakly. "I think I've done enough damage sitting clean." They worked side by side in silence, gathering broken bits of concrete. After a while, she said quietly, "I wanted it to look perfect. Everything in my life has always been about order. I thought if I made the neighborhood beautiful, I'd finally belong." Devin watched her for a moment, then said gently, "You don't fix belonging by controlling things. You fix it by caring for what's already alive." She nodded, eyes wet. "I learned that the hard way." When she left, she thanked him, not with pride, but with sincerity. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. Months later, the restoration was complete. County workers and volunteers rebuilt the creek's banks with native plants and natural stone. The new HOA, under Camille's guidance, dissolved the old beautification committee and replaced it with an environmental one. At its first meeting, Devin spoke before the group. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of what they'd lived through. "We built this place thinking we could control everything. The grass, the fences, even nature itself. But nature doesn't follow our blueprints. It doesn't care about votes or rules. When we respect it, it takes care of us. When we fight it, it reminds us who's really in charge." The room was silent. Some nodded, others wiped tears. Even Camille, who rarely showed emotion, smiled. Weeks later, as the last construction truck left, Devin stood on the rebuilt bridge, watching the children throw stones into the water. Norma waved from her porch, holding 2 glasses of lemonade. He joined her, sitting on the steps. "Feels strange," he said softly. "Seeing it all fixed after everything," she smiled. "Funny thing about disasters, they tear things down, but they also show you what's worth rebuilding." He nodded, watching sunlight ripple over the moving water. "Maybe that's the point. Sometimes you have to lose control to remember what really matters." A few houses down, Margot was planting shrubs, not perfect, not symmetrical, but healthy. She looked up and waved. This time, Devin waved back. The story of Oakshire Meadows eventually faded from the news, but the lesson remained. At the creek's entrance, a small plaque now stood, engraved with Devin's words, "You can't bury a creek and expect it to forget where it used to run." He read it once, smiled and kept walking, the sound of the flowing water following him like an old friend, and as his voice echoed softly, reaching the hearts of those listening, he said, "People always talk about control, keeping everything neat, tidy, safe, but control is an illusion. The real strength is in balance, in knowing when to guide and when to step back. Remember that the next time you think you can outsmart nature, or people," he looked once more at the creek, then at the scarred but standing neighborhood beyond it, And if this story taught you something about pride, patience, or the price of ignoring what's natural, subscribe to Unfolded Tales Explained. Press the bell icon and share your thoughts below. Because sometimes the most powerful lessons don't come from books or speeches. They come from the water that refuses to stop flowing.